The rain had ceased, but the air remained thick and heavy, the remnants of the storm lingering in the atmosphere. The woods were eerily quiet, a sharp contrast to the chaos that had just passed. Kieran paced slowly along the forest path, the grip of his rifle solid in his hand. He hadn't fired it in days, yet it was a constant reminder of the world they were still part of, a world full of danger, uncertainty, and loss. Beside him, Rhett moved with careful steps, his eyes scanning the trees, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Every now and then, he glanced at the small cub that stumbled along behind them, its fragile legs unsteady from the ordeal it had just survived. "Are you sure this is the right choice?" Rhett's voice cut through the silence, laced with hesitation. "Taking that thing with us? It could bring more trouble than it's worth." Kieran's gaze remained fixed ahead, but his mind was caught in the same struggle. He had no answers, only decisions made in the heat of the moment, driven by something deeper than logic. "I don't know," he finally admitted, his voice low, almost resigned. "But it's too late to turn back now." Rhett looked down at the cub, its dark eyes wide with trust. Or was it simply survival instinct? The creature had chosen them, or perhaps it was fate that had bound them together. Whatever it was, the cub had become more than just an animal. It had become family. "All right," Rhett murmured, still uncertain. "But if more bears show up, or worse, we're on our own." Kieran's eyes flickered upward, where the dense canopy of leaves rustled in the breeze. The forest was beautiful, but it was also unforgiving, alive with hidden dangers. In that moment, it was the only place where Kieran could find some semblance of peace. "We'll deal with it if it comes," he replied, his voice steady, though there was an undercurrent of doubt he couldn't hide. He wasn't just talking about the bears. He was talking about everything: the war, the endless fight for survival, the choices he had made, and the ones yet to come. The cub paused, its small nose twitching at a sound in the distance. Kieran froze, instinctively dropping to a crouch. Something was out there, something moving. Rhett, sensing the shift in the air, subtly reached for his sidearm, his muscles tensing. "Stay sharp," he whispered. Kieran didn't speak. Instead, he gestured for the cub to stay behind him, his protective instincts kicking in. The little creature obeyed, pressing itself closer to Kieran's legs, as if it understood the danger. Together they waited in tense silence. The rustling grew louder, closer now. Kieran's heart began to race, his grip tightening on the rifle. Was it another animal? Or something worse? Another soldier, perhaps? He couldn't know. Then a shadow darted through the trees. Too fast. Kieran's hand flew to the trigger, but before he could react, the figure emerged from the foliage. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a soldier. It was a woman. She stood with the grace of someone who had spent years in the wild, her sharp eyes scanning them like a predator sizing up its prey. Her clothes were simple but functional, camouflaged against the forest backdrop. She moved with purpose, every step deliberate. But it was the fire in her eyes that caught Kieran's attention, the wildness that spoke of someone who had long abandoned the comforts of society, someone who knew the forest better than anyone. "Who are you?" Kieran asked, his voice controlled, though his instincts screamed caution. The woman studied him for a long moment, sizing him up with a cool, calculating gaze. Then her eyes flicked to Rhett, and finally to the cub. "I could ask you the same thing," she replied, her voice rough but tinged with a hint of amusement. "You're far from where you should be, soldier." Rhett stepped forward, his hand hovering near his weapon. "We're just passing through. No need for trouble." The woman gave a humorless smile. "Trouble? In a place like this? There's always trouble, whether you want it or not." The cub let out a soft whine, trembling against Kieran's legs. He instinctively pulled it closer, his eyes never leaving the woman. She noticed the gesture, and her expression softened, just a fraction. "You're protecting that cub?" she asked, her tone more curious now. "I am," Kieran replied, his voice firm. "From what?" she pressed. "From everything," he said quietly. The woman tilted her head, considering his answer. After a long moment, she took a step closer. Her eyes flicked between Kieran and Rhett, then returned to the cub. "It's not safe here for him," she said, her tone now more serious. "There's a predator nearby, a bear you don't want to meet." Kieran's stomach twisted at the words. "A predator?" The woman nodded, her face hardening. "It's the cub's mother. She won't stop until she finds him. If you keep moving forward, you'll run straight into her. And trust me, you don't want to face her." The words struck Kieran like a punch to the gut. The cub's mother had been following them? He hadn't even considered the possibility that the bear would come looking for her cub, especially not this soon. "I know what you're thinking," the woman continued, her voice low and steady. "But you won't outrun her. Not alone." "We're not here to fight," Kieran said, his tone tight. "We just need to get out of here, but we won't leave the cub." The woman eyed him carefully, studying the resolve in his face. After a beat, she exhaled slowly, her expression hardening. "All right," she said, her voice firm, "but if you want to make it out of here, you'll need my help. And there's always a price to pay in these woods. The question is, how much are you willing to give?" Kieran swallowed, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what kind of help she was offering or what it would cost. But one thing was certain. He had no choice. "We'll pay whatever it takes," Kieran said, meeting her gaze with determination. The woman looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words. Then, without another word, she turned and began walking deeper into the forest. "Follow me." Kieran motioned for Rhett to stay close as they fell in line behind her. The cub's small, trembling form stayed near Kieran, its wide eyes searching the darkened woods for threats they couldn't yet see. They moved swiftly and silently, the woman guiding them through hidden paths that only someone who knew the land could navigate. Hours passed in this manner, the forest growing denser, the air thick with tension. Finally, the woman halted. "We're almost there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kieran's pulse quickened, but he knew better than to ask where they were headed. He could feel it, the sense that they were nearing something, but it wasn't just safety they were heading toward. It was the reckoning. "We'll be on our own after this," the woman said, her eyes dark. "There's no going back." Kieran glanced down at the cub, its tiny face filled with trust, something he couldn't ignore. "We'll make it," he replied, his voice unwavering. The woman nodded once, then stepped aside, vanishing into the shadows. Kieran and Rhett exchanged a brief look before moving forward. The forest felt quieter now, almost peaceful, as though the danger had passed. But Kieran knew better. The world was still out there, waiting for them, and the future was anything but certain. But for the first time in a long while, as he walked into the unknown with the cub at his side, he felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile thing, but hope nonetheless. And with that hope, they stepped into the future, ready to face whatever came next.